The bloody mystery of the red rose petals shocked the people of America. The morning sunlight filtered through the window, illuminating the luxurious bedroom of the beach house. In that quiet space, a horrifying scene was waiting to be discovered. Greg de Villers, a promising young man, lay motionless on the king-size bed, his chest covered with crimson red rose petals. Next to him, a broken wedding photo frame, sharp shards of glass scattered on the polished wooden floor. Inspector Sarah Martinez stepped into the scene, her sharp eyes scanning every detail of the room. 10 years of experience investigating murders could not prepare her for the scene before her. There was something very unusual, very poetic about the way the killer had staged the scene. "Time of death?" Sarah asked softly, her eyes still not leaving the body. "Roughly around 2 this morning, sir," Johnson, her assistant, replied. "Cause of death undetermined. No signs of forced entry or struggle." Sarah nodded, approaching the bed. She bent down, examining the rose petals closely. They were fresh, their sweet scent mixed with the scent of death that was beginning to spread. "Who found the body?" "The victim's wife, Amanda de Villers. She's in the living room receiving psychological care." Sarah frowned. An implausible detail had just flashed through her mind. Where did the victim's wife sleep last night? Johnson flipped through the notebook. According to her statement, she slept in the living room because the two had just argued. Sarah muttered, her eyes stopping at the broken wedding photo frame. She picked up a piece of glass, examining it carefully. No fingerprints. She put the glass down, walking out of the bedroom. Amanda de Villers was sitting huddled on the sofa, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. Sarah sat down across from the young girl. "Hello, Amanda. This is Detective Martinez. I'm sorry for your loss. Can you tell me what happened?" Amanda looked up, her blue eyes red. I don't know. We had an argument last night about work. Greg wanted me to give up my research and stay home to take care of the family. We argued, and I decided to sleep in the living room. When I went into the room to wake him this morning," her voice caught and tears welled up again. Sarah nodded sympathetically, but in her mind she was already starting to put the pieces together. Amanda's story sounded plausible, but her intuition told her something was off. "Amanda, do you know what the rose petals mean?" Amanda shook her head, bewildered. "No, I don't understand. Why the roses?" Sarah silently watched Amanda's reaction. She saw no signs of pretense, but that didn't mean Amanda was innocent. She decided to change the subject. "Where does Greg work?" "He's the CFO of a major pharmaceutical company," Amanda replied, her voice trembling. "And I'm a researcher at the university." Sarah nodded, taking notes. She sensed something was going on between their jobs, but that was just a hypothesis. She needed more evidence. "Thank you, Amanda. We'll continue to investigate and let you know if we have any new information." Sarah stood up, motioning to Johnson. They stepped out of the villa, the cool ocean air hitting their faces like a wake-up call. "Johnson, I want you to do a thorough check on the company Greg works for and Amanda's research. Maybe we can find a clue there." Johnson nodded, quickly taking notes. Sarah looked back at the magnificent villa, now tinged with tragedy. She knew that behind the luxurious walls and the perfect appearance of the young couple, there was a dark secret, and she would uncover it, no matter what. 2 days later, Sarah sat in her office, immersed in files and reports. The investigation was starting to reveal suspicious details. "Sir," Johnson knocked on the door and entered, holding a thick file in his hand. "I have information on Greg's company and Amanda's research." Sarah looked up, eyes bright with interest. "Tell me." Johnson opened the file and began to read. "Greg works for Synergy Pharmaceuticals, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. They are developing a new drug that is supposed to cure a number of serious diseases." "And Amanda?" Sarah asked, tapping her finger on the table. "She's been researching plant toxins, specifically flowers that are potentially toxic." Sarah frowned. "Roses?" Johnson nodded. "Yes, some roses are toxic, although it's rare." Sarah stood up, her mind reeling from the new information. "We need to re-examine the body. Order a toxicology exam immediately." The test results came in after a tense 48 hours. Sarah read the report, her heart racing. Greg had died of poisoning from a rare plant toxin found in certain roses. "We have a lead," Sarah told Johnson, but there are still many unanswered questions. They decided to meet Amanda again. This time, Sarah went to her office at the university. Amanda sat behind her desk, looking tired but calmer than the last time they met. "Detective, is there any news?" Sarah sat down, looking straight into Amanda's eyes. "We found out how Greg died. He was poisoned with a toxin from roses." Amanda paled, her hands shaking. "No, it can't be. How could?" "Amanda," Sarah said softly but firmly, "I know you've been researching plant toxins, especially from flowers. Can you explain this?" Amanda was silent for a moment, then suddenly burst into tears. "I didn't kill Greg. I loved him, but I think I know what happened." Sarah waited patiently. Amanda wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and began to tell. "My research, it involves developing drugs from plant toxins. Synergy Pharmaceuticals, Greg's company, they want to buy my research. They pressured Greg to convince me to sell it." Sarah nodded, the pieces starting to fit together. "Is that why you two argued?" Amanda nodded. "Greg wanted me to sell the research and stay home. He said we'd have a better life that way, but I didn't want to. This is my life's work." "So who would want Greg dead?" Sarah asked, though she already had a theory in mind. Amanda looked down at the table, her voice shaking. "I think maybe Daniel Ross, the CEO of Synergy. He's pressured Greg on multiple occasions, even threatened to fire him if he didn't convince me." Sarah nodded, taking notes. "Thank you, Amanda. We'll look into this further." Leaving Amanda's office, Sarah felt they were getting closer to the truth, but there were still many questions to be answered. How did the rose poison get into Greg's body? Who put the rose petals on his chest? And most importantly, who was behind it all? Sarah decided to focus on Daniel Ross. If he was the mastermind, there would be a trail. "Johnson," Sarah called over the phone. "I need you to look into everything about Daniel Ross. Bank accounts, schedules, phone calls, everything." The investigation continued, hoping to soon unravel the mystery behind Greg DeViller's death. Sarah knew she was dealing with a complex case where the line between victim and perpetrator was frighteningly blurred. But she would not stop until she found the truth, even if it shocked the entire pharmaceutical industry. A week passed, with sleepless nights and hours of digging. Sarah and her team were slowly building a picture of the case, but there were still many missing pieces. "Sir," Johnson said, knocking on Sarah's office door, his face beaming, "we have a new lead." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Tell me." Johnson placed a file on the desk. "We looked into Daniel Ross's account like you asked. There was a suspicious transaction the night Greg died." Sarah opened the file, her eyes quickly scanning the numbers. A large sum of money had been transferred from Ross's personal account to an anonymous offshore account. "Interesting," Sarah murmured. "We need to look into that account. It could be the money paid to the killer." Johnson nodded. "The techs are working on the tracing, but there's one more thing, boss. We checked Ross's schedule the night of the murder. He had a call that lasted almost an hour, starting at 1 a.m. Sarah frowned. "An hour before Greg died. We need to know who was on the other end." "Already did, boss," Johnson said proudly. "That number belongs to a scientist named Dr. Eliza Chen. She used to work for Synergy but left 6 months ago." Sarah stood up. "I need to see Dr. Chen right away." They found Eliza Chen in a small lab on the outskirts of town. She was a slim Asian woman with sharp eyes behind square-framed glasses. "Dr. Chen," Sarah began, "we need to ask you a few questions about Daniel Ross and Synergy Pharmaceuticals." Eliza eyed them warily. "I have nothing to do with Synergy anymore." "So why did you talk to Ross for an hour the night Greg DeVillers died?" Eliza was startled, her eyes flashing with panic. She was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I guess it's time to tell the truth." Sarah and Johnson listened as Eliza told her story. She had been a lead researcher on Synergy's new drug project, but had discovered dangerous side effects that the company had deliberately hidden. "I warned Ross, but he just wanted me to keep quiet," Eliza said, her voice thick with bitterness. "When I threatened to go public, they fired me and threatened to ruin my career." "So what was that call about that night?" Sarah asked. Eliza looked Sarah straight in the eye. "Ross called me and said Greg had found out and was threatening to go public. He asked me about how to use plant toxins without leaving a trace." Sarah felt a jolt of electricity run down her spine. "What did you say?" I refused, Eliza said, her voice shaking. But I was afraid. I was afraid Ross would try something else. I didn't expect him to actually. Sarah nodded, sensing they were getting closer to the truth. Dr. Chen, we need you to give us a detailed account of everything, and we might need you as a witness. Leaving Eliza's lab, Sarah felt the final pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. But one big question remained. How did Ross get access to the rose poison? Johnson, Sarah said as they climbed into the car, I need you to double-check everything on Amanda de Villers, especially who had access to her lab. Johnson nodded, typing away on his tablet. Sarah looked out the window, her mind racing with theories. She had a feeling they were at a crucial turning point in the case. But was the truth as simple as it seemed, or were there deeper secrets waiting to be uncovered? As the car rolled back to the police station, Sarah knew the next few days would be a race against time. They had to find the decisive evidence quickly before Ross could cover his tracks. And most importantly, they had to figure out Amanda's role in the case. Was she really innocent, or had she contributed, or perhaps knowingly, to her husband's death? The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the office, her mind still reeling from the new clues. She had just turned on her computer when Johnson burst in, breathing heavily. Sir, we have news about Amanda, he said, placing a file on the desk. She's not the only one with access to the lab. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Who else? A graduate student named Mark Sutton. He works under Amanda and has a key to the lab. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. We need to see him now. They found Mark in a small apartment near the university. He was a young man, intelligent but nervous. Mark, Sarah began, we need to ask you about your work with Dr. de Villers. Mark nodded, looking nervous. I'll try to help. Sarah looked him straight in the eye. Did you know about Amanda's rose toxin research? Mark was silent for a moment, then sighed. Yes, I did. In fact, I was the one who suggested it. Sarah and Johnson exchanged glances. Why? I used to work for Synergy, Mark said, his voice shaking. They wanted me to keep an eye on Amanda's research, but when I realized how important it was, I didn't want Synergy to take it over. Sarah sensed they were getting closer to the truth. Have you been in touch with Daniel Ross? Mark paled. He threatened me, said he'd ruin my career if I didn't help him get Amanda's formula. And what did you do? Mark looked down, his shoulders shaking. I gave Ross the toxin sample, but I didn't know he was going to use it to kill people. I swear. Sarah nodded, feeling the last pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Mark, we need you to give us a detailed statement about everything. Leaving Mark's apartment, Sarah and Johnson quickly returned to the police station. They had enough evidence to arrest Daniel Ross, but Sarah felt like there was still one important piece missing. Johnson, she said as they entered the office, I need you to review all the security cameras around Greg's house the night he died. Pay special attention to the time between midnight and 2 a.m. Johnson nodded and got to work. Sarah sat down, staring at the wall of information about the case. She had a feeling they were missing something. A few hours later, Johnson burst in, eyes alight with excitement. Boss, we have it! Sarah looked up. What? Security cameras caught a man walking into Greg's house at 1:30 in the morning, and guess what? It was Daniel Ross. Sarah jumped to her feet. We have enough evidence. Prepare an arrest warrant. But by the time they reached Synergy Pharmaceuticals, they realized it was too late. Daniel Ross was gone, leaving behind an empty office and a wiped computer. Shit, Sarah muttered. He got away. Just then, her phone rang. It was Amanda. Detective, Amanda's voice trembled over the phone. I think I'm in danger. Someone's trying to break into my apartment. Sarah felt her blood freeze in her veins. Amanda, stay calm and hide. We're on our way. When Sarah and her team arrived at Amanda's apartment, they found the door broken. Inside, they found signs of a violent struggle. Amanda was gone, and on the table was a bright red rose. Sarah picked up the rose, a chill running down her spine. The case had entered a new, more dangerous and unexpected chapter. Now, it was not just about finding Greg's killer, but also about rescuing Amanda before it was too late. Johnson, Sarah said, her voice determined, alert the entire city. We need to find Daniel Ross and Amanda de Villers as soon as possible. As Sarah left the apartment, she knew it was a race against time. and the price of failure could be the life of an innocent person. It had been a tense 48 hours since Amanda's disappearance. Sarah and her team had searched relentlessly, following every single clue. Finally, a breakthrough had come. "Boss," Johnson rushed into the office, breathing heavily. "We found Ross's location, an abandoned cabin on the outskirts of town." Sarah mobilized her forces immediately. They approached the cabin in silence, weapons at the ready. When they stormed in, they were met with an unexpected sight. Daniel Ross was kneeling, his hands raised in surrender. Beside him, Amanda stood, holding a gun pointed at Ross's head. "Amanda," Sarah said softly, "put the gun down." Amanda turned to Sarah, her eyes red and filled with tears. "You don't understand. He killed Greg. He ruined my life." Sarah slowly moved closer. "I understand, Amanda. We know the truth. Ross will face justice, but not like this." Amanda trembled, the gun still pointed at Ross. "He didn't just kill Greg. He wanted my research. He threatened to kill me if I didn't give it to him." Sarah nodded. "And that's why you planned all this, right?" Amanda jumped, looking at Sarah with bewildered eyes. Sarah continued, her voice soft but firm. "You knew Ross would try to kill Greg. You prepared the rose poison, left clues leading to Ross. You even staged your own kidnapping to make sure we would find you here." Amanda slowly lowered the gun, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I had no choice. Greg was bribed. He was going to sell my research to Ross. I had to protect it, protect the people who could be saved by this drug." Sarah stepped closer, gently taking the gun from Amanda. "I understand, but now it's time for justice to take place." As the police took both Ross and Amanda away, Sarah stood in the cabin, a heavy weight on her shoulders. The case had been solved, but the cost had been too high. No one had really won in this tragedy. A few weeks later, in court, the truth was finally revealed. Daniel Ross was sentenced to life in prison for murder and other crimes related to Synergy's illegal activities. Amanda, despite a reduced sentence for cooperating with the police, still faced a 10-year sentence for being an accessory to murder. As the trial ended, Sarah stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching Amanda being led away. She couldn't help but wonder, in a world filled with ambition and greed, could the lines between right and wrong, between justice and evil, ever become so blurred? The Rose Petals case was over, but the moral and human questions it raised would resonate forever. And for Sarah, it would be an unforgettable lesson in the complexity of human beings and the decisions they face in desperate situations. As dusk fell over the city, Sarah knew that there were more cases ahead of her. But this case will forever be a landmark in her career, a reminder that sometimes the truth can be more painful than even the most beautiful lies.